and I can't remember all the questions, but there was no right or wrong answer. It was just an insight into how this child thought and what their politics might be, or how they're being raised.
Right.
Or they were influencing.
Is it
them.
rigid
They were influencing
or is it
them, and so red flag, you kidding? I marched myself into the principal's office, who seemed to be very ignorant. Now, I will give him the benefit of the doubt of that this is the testing company, and he's an interim principal, so maybe he was asleep at the switch. I don't know, or maybe he doesn't know anything about Common Core, which is what I'm figuring out he pretty much doesn't. But he's trying to tell me that, well, at least, you can't get away from Common Core. Pardon me? This is a private school. So now it's seeping into your private schools.
Yep.
Now I went on the website, Terra Nova website, and clearly, big bold letters, welcome to the world of Common Core. So now it's seeping into the private schools.
It's my understanding it's private schools, home schools,
Yeah,
everything.
that you can't get away from it. So now I'm in the quandary
No.
of my child's graduating from this school. I pulled my 7th grader out. Do I homeschool? Do I send them to public school, which in my core, I just can't even fathom, but it is something that I need to decide. It's now May. I've been dragging my feet because I'm scared to death, because I've invested so much in my boys. And their education has been stellar up to this point. I mean, it's been the way it was when we were kids. It was on your achievement, on your individual performance. And now I'm gonna send them off into the world, well, honey, I know you don't want to answer, but just answer it the way you know they want you to answer it.
Exactly.
And then,
Yeah.
so you can move on.
Yep. Is that really education?
That's not education,
Yeah.
that is just do it so you don't get in trouble.
Yes.
Yeah, what have you learned?
What have you
That goes on
learned?
We all had to do it in college.
That goes on in college.
We all had to do it in
Yeah,
college,
I'm
let's
sure.
face it. I mean, I've got 2 in college, and
Yeah.
I've got 1 at UNH, and I'm like,
And
whatever
you do
just
adapt
talk
to the
about
professor,
sports.
you know?
Talk about, all your
Yeah.
papers has to be on sports.
Yeah.
Don't give them anything else.
It's,
I mean, because really, it's like, it's scary.
But what it's doing is it's developing a culture of, and I hate to say this word, but sheeple, where people are just led by the nose, starting at a very young age. That's why they're doing it at the kindergarten level, to get these kids indoctrinated, and it's another word I hate, I'm wearing my tinfoil hat, but it's exactly what it is. This is what it is. They want you to be socialists. They want you just to follow along, and the government is here, and the have and have-nots. That's how it's gonna be.
But
Well, like
there
she
are
said,
ways to
complacency is
there's a
the
way to
biggest
combat that, because, in Bedford where I live, I watch, a lot of times I'll watch the school board meetings, and in the 8th grade curriculum, the 8th grade something, she was presenting at the school board meeting one time, and she said something about that the Constitution is a living document. So I emailed my superintendent immediately, and I said, could you please explain that? And of course, he referred to the Constitution as being a living document because you can amend it. And I said, that's not true. It is not a living document, and here's where the term comes from. And so I educated him on where the term comes from. It's actually from an attorney who came up with that term. So it actually means judicial activism. The judiciary, or the judicial branch creating laws. And most people don't know that, but I had done my research. I had actually went to a constitutional expert, and he explained it all to me, and I began reading about this years ago. So I wrote him back and said, you are misleading your 8th grade students if you are teaching them that the Constitution is a living document. Here's where that term comes from. This is what it means. I understand what you're saying, that it is a living document because you can. So, you need to take those opportunities too, because you'd be amazed what they don't know sometimes until you tell them. So I sent him that letter and explained it all. I mean, it was complicated. I actually worked with the attorney on the letter, and very difficult to understand, but I had to put it in writing, and I sent it to all of my school board members and him. So by God, you better be getting it right now. Don't teach them this way. That was interesting because that teacher left immediately right afterwards. I don't know why. But honestly, you know what? If you're not going to teach the kids right, and I mean, I go to this, I've written my school board, and the superintendent said, are you having the kids read the founding documents? How about the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers? There's a lot you can do at the local level. I mean, Senator Stiles wanted to put into law cursive writing and memorization of math, of multiplication tables. go to your school board and say, why isn't this being taught? And start getting parents, they did
Take
that.
out Common Core, which is the cause of the problem.
It's cause of the problem. Yeah,
That
Yep.
passed incidentally.
it did, I know.
It did.
Well, it's
Cursive
voluntary
writing.
now, it's voluntary.
It's as voluntary,
Yeah.
and one of the things that people have said to me is that, people my age write a note in a birthday card to your grandchild. The grandchild has to take it to
That's
mom or dad to translate it,
That's right,
because it might as well be Arabic.
yeah.
Or some other, they have no idea what
It's
it
good
is.
practice for
Well,
them.
you want your child to learn to read, to write and read cursive so they could read the
Founding
Constitution?
documents,
Right.
that's right.
That-
The
You know
original
what
one.
cursive?
My
Yeah.
daughter went to take the SATs when she was a junior in high school, and she got there, and so, they say sign your name, so she signs the name, and she comes home, she's like, Mom, you would not believe how many kids do not know how to sign their name.
Oh, yeah. I work at a college
They do not
And
know how to sign their
administrative-
name.
position, and students will come to me, and I'll have to send them up to financial aid. And I write down the question that they really need to ask, because a lot of them, they're not financially literate, they don't understand a lot, it's very complex. And I learned pretty quickly, they can't read cursive writing
No, they can't.
at
I know,
all.
it's sad.
This is sad.
college level.
You know, I wanna take something back to something you brought up earlier and take it back to the confidence. I wanna give you an example of what happened in Bedford a few years ago. And I'm just gonna tell you what happened, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions. Based on my explanation of what competencies are, they are a way of changing attitudes, values, and beliefs in students. And we've seen this outcome-based education example over and over again. And so in Bedford, I had a parent contact me and say that the book that they were requiring the students to read in a personal finance class upset them, upset their kid. Normally parents do, it's so funny because everybody's like, oh, the parents want to shield their kids from these books. Parents don't get the books until the kids bring it to them and say, Mom, I'm bothered by this. Okay, so we had that example. And she was bothered by the book because in the book, it was called Nickel and Dime, Why You Can't Make It on Minimum Wage in America. And this was in this was in a personal finance class where you're thinking, my kids are learning how to balance a checkbook, becoming financially literate, how to calculate simple interest. They're reading a book called Nickel and Dime, Why I Can't Make It in America, written by a social activist who espouses Marxism in her book, and it's not like she hides it. And this was in personal finance. And so I asked the superintendent at the time, I said, why would you choose this book for a personal finance class? And his answer was, it met a competency. I have my perfect example to show parents now, because I thought, wonderful, now I've got my example. This is a way of changing their attitudes, beliefs, and values in kids. This has nothing to do with personal finance. She didn't even have a personal finance degree or anything in finance that way. It was just so blatantly politically biased.
Yeah.
And then there was no alternative to it. So, you asked the question about what is their ultimate goal. I mean, you can make those decisions for yourself, but here's an example you can look at. I mean, this is competency-based education now. This is what we're gonna get.
I would love to add an example to that.
Yeah.
My daughter was a junior last year, economics. I have a degree in management, associate's degree in business. I've had plenty of economics class, supply, demand,
Me
the
too.
supply curve,
Yep.
this, that, the
Yeah.
other thing. My daughter comes home and says, Mom, yeah, there's something funny about this class, she says to me.
Yep.
And she gives me all her material. Mind you, she's never had an economics class.
Yep.
Never. She gives me this printout of a TED Talk. So it's the printout of what the talk was. So it's a transcript, okay? So they're not allowed to watch the talk. They're given the transcript to read, okay? And all their background is on the government is the primer for the economy. Not that the market is the driver of the economy, like I was taught, and probably you were taught, and everybody else in this room. And they always lined up communism, capitalism, and socialism. The three. They studied the three of them. But this particular TED Talk was a psychologist.
Oh.
he wasn't even an economist, a psychologist at some California college talking about economics. And it was all about, we have too many choices in this country. You go to buy salad dressing. There's too many choices. How can you pick? Why bother, investing in a retirement? There's too many choices. It's too confusing. This is what the man was saying. I read it. I couldn't believe it. I went and I found it online and I watched it. And at the thing that you hear in the TED Talk is it's full of probably like grad students and maybe colleagues of his. And when he says really highly controversial stuff, you hear them all snickering because they know it's controversial. But you have 16-year-old kids reading this like it's a textbook, and this is the way of the world.
But you
It
still
just
have
is
that,
disgusting.
I always tell parents, if that happens, go to the school board meetings, because it has to be made public. You have to let your elected school board members know, and invite members of the media. I always say invite members of the media, because quite frankly, until people start hearing about this, they always think, I think maybe I'm the only one, or something like that.
Well, let me just say, there's 2 economics teachers in that high school. One, my older daughter had, and he still teaches economics. Wonderful, the kids love it. They have the latte program, they pick stocks, they track them, they learn
Nice.
how
Love
to
that.
have a retirement account.
Yes.
And he still teaches that. But then you have this other teacher. And I spoke to both teachers. I went in and I spoke to them. And you know what that one teacher said to me that did this different kind of, well, this is all about higher standards. You want your daughter to have higher standards. And I looked at him. And the end of that talk was, this is what you've come for. What was the punchline? It's basically you have to settle for less. I said, you just had my daughter read an article about having too many choices and that she has to settle for less, and you're telling me you're giving a higher standard?
Yeah.
How old was
But,
he?
He's probably in his 40s.
Oh.
but this whole change is a political change,
Yes,
is what it is. And
yes.
it was done under the cover of darkness without congressional oversight,
That's true.
right?
That's
It
true.
was slid in and it
That's
was
true.
sold
This
to
is
the
not a law.
states with dollars attached.
Yes.
And that's why they adopted it. And that's where we're at.
Yes.
So unless they rise up, and that's why the media doesn't really know about it, because there was no debate.
If you
I think-
It was offered,
If you
it was taken, and that's
They
how
still
we got it.
choose not to hear either.
Because
Right.
it pays their salary.
But if you want, Joe, go back to the State Board of Education meeting from July 2010 and listen to June and July, when they talked about those standards. You wanna see some real erudite talk? It was unbelievable. Well, you didn't read them, so that you don't get to talk, says Daphne. And then the next one talked, and then the chairman said, I think you're just shoving this down our throat. That was the one against, who was 4-1. But it was a laughing stock. If that transcript could go out on the paper, they didn't read them, they didn't compare them, but they had to vote on them.
Nobody
was all
compared
one.
them. In New Hampshire, they invited me, the DOE, this is before they knew I'd become such a pain to them. They invited me to come in when they were doing the draft standards. And they said, we want you to come in and look at the draft standards. And I'm thinking, I am not qualified to look at these drafts, to really, and I didn't go before the board and give my expert opinion, because I'm not an expert on even math standards. But I thought, I'm gonna go in, and I'm just gonna put the California standards next to the draft. Because I thought, I could at least look at them. And I did, and I was in a room with all these teachers. And I noticed that they brought in the New Hampshire standards, and they were comparing them to the Common Core standards. Well, the New Hampshire math standards weren't anything anything great. But I'm thinking, why aren't you comparing them to the California standards? They probably didn't know. But that's what they were doing. They were looking at the New Hampshire standards compared to the Common Core standards. So they're thinking to themselves, and I'll be honest, some of the language is a little clearer in the Common Core standards than they were in the New Hampshire standards. But clear doesn't mean better. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. Nobody did the comparisons to the California standard. They're not doing it
They
to the
didn't
next
even-
generation science
They
standards.
didn't even complete it to the New Hampshire standards. They will admit that
Yeah.
on the tape.
So what do we do?
They didn't even do a side by
That's,
What do
side.
we
that's
do?
the crux of it, because I'm so,
Yeah.
and I'm just one person, but we all concerned parents, grandparents, you feel in this day and age, just personally, you feel very, voiceless.
I know, it
And-
makes you feel that way.
Yeah, the whole nation feels that way. How do you fight the machine? Because that's what it is.
Well, in 2010, there was nobody. I was
Right.
the only one in the state looking around going, oh my God, what have we done? Nobody in the legislature knew about this. Nobody, I mean, and so I just began sharing information about what we had done. I started going talking to groups like this. I connected with Doris. And then she, you know, thank
Right in
God she jumped on board. And then we had Michelle Lavelle from the New Hampshire
Another
Liberty
retired
Alliance.
homeschooler.
So the three of us have really, you know, gone throughout the state for the last 5 years talking to groups and just really, you know, you brought up the indoctrination. I go back to, can we just give an academic foundation? And if, you know what, if a child goes off in this political direction that doesn't agree with me, so be it. At least you